Today's episode is brought to you by Boron, the world leader in homeopathic medicines. I'll be honest, I used to use all conventional medicines, your basic over-the-counter products, to treat just about everything. As I became a mom, I got more concerned about what I was putting in my and my family's bodies. And I started wishing that more of what I was using was derived from natural active ingredients. In other words, I was looking to become more mindful in my approach to mine and my family's wellness. Know better, do better, right? So I started exploring homeopathic medicines, and I really liked what I found. My first Boron product was Arnica Gel, a topical solution made from the Arnica montana plant. It relieves things like muscle aches, pain, and bruises, and works like a charm. I'll never forget the first time I put it on my 9-year-old son's gnarly bruise from falling off his scooter, and the discoloration was gone the next day. After that, I was in, and I've trusted Boron ever since. Whether you're turning to their products for help with pain relief, support through cold and flu season, first aid skincare, stress and sleep, women's wellness, kids and baby, or any other category, rest assured that Boron has got you covered. Boron products are sold nationwide. Head on over to Boron USA, that's BOIRON USA.com, to check out their full lineup of products. It's September of 2023, and I'm putting on an outfit that I had waited 4 years to wear. Just pre-pandemic, I had been invited to a press preview at the offices of the luxe, playful activewear brand Therese, and I had been gifted a fabulous black suit with gold embellishments. Okay, get this. The suit, a blazer and leggings adorned with an overlay of puffy gold lame built-in leg warmers, had sat in my closet for the whole pandemic and the brief time following, just waiting for an event special enough to come out and play. Well, September 2023 was that moment. So you might think I was getting ready to go to a movie premiere or a celeb meet and greet, maybe a hot concert. But no. See, when you're a wellness geek, those things pale in comparison to the invite that I had received this particular evening. It was the 40th anniversary of the global homeopathic company, Boron. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Quote-unquote influencers, like myself, get a bad rap. People don't think that we truly care about the products we promote on social media. And of course, like I've said before, some influencers aren't genuine and authentic in their ambassadorship. But when you've been doing this as long as I have, you just don't get to this point without caring. I've repped a lot of wellness brands on social media over the past decade in my career as a wellness influencer. My handle started as @NYCFitFam. If you followed me for a while, you know that. And today it's evolved into my name, @Jamie Hess. But the part that has stayed the same is my genuine love and passion for all things wellness. I'll admit it. I'm truly a wellness geek. And so is my husband, George. So, when we received the invite to attend the 40th anniversary of one of our favorite brands, well, this was our Oscars. Head on over to this podcast's Instagram account @Gratitudeology to see us all dolled up on our way into the event. Once inside, we partied the night away in celebration of all things homeopathy and wellness. It was awesome. And I finally got to meet the company's French CEO, Janique. We hit it off. And what was the most pronounced to me was his genuine excitement and passion for the full spectrum of what homeopathy can do for people. I was inspired by his passion, and I promised to come back to their offices shortly thereafter to meet with him and his team to further help him tell that story to my audience. And that is how we came to partner on this 3-episode miniseries. If you missed the first 2, go back and take a listen to our episodes with Danny Seo, Eco Lifestyle Guru, and Annika Bearden, World Champion Mountain Biker. But today, we're going to wrap up the series with an interesting pivot from our typical format. As I sat in the boron office that day, weeks after the plates and glasses from the party had been cleared and put away, Janique took the time to share with me some truths about homeopathy, and boron in particular, that I didn't previously know. Namely, the following. I've long used homeopathic remedies like echinacea to help with, say, relieving a sore throat, or arnicare for help with physical ailments like a bruise or muscle ache. But it had never occurred to me that homeopathy could be used to treat emotional conditions or to support my mood and mental well-being. When he explained to me all of the incredible ways boron products can be used to help people live their best lives, I was immediately struck. So, on today's episode, we'll have a real treat. We'll be joined by preeminent homeopathic practitioner Joette Calabrese, who will take us on a walk down memory lane through this very podcast. That's right. We'll listen back to snippets of past episodes, and we'll discuss how the different situations and emotions that we encounter in our guests, by the way, emotions and situations which I'd have to imagine that you deal with too, things like overwhelm, grief, even stage fright. We'll learn which homeopathic remedies could help in each of those situations. It's one of the most fascinating lessons in self-care I've ever received, and I can't wait to bring it all to you, too. So, sit back, relax, and get ready to have your mind blown and walk away with some helpful new tips to live life as the happiest, healthiest version of you today on the Gratitudeology Podcast.
Will you walk through the fire? Would you ride through the storm? Will you walk on a wire? Will you save me if I fall? Will you break through the madness? Set us down where we're safe. I'll be right here waiting till you find me again.
Joette Calabrese, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Jamie, it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to today.
There's usually like two, well, you can tell me, you're the expert, but I find in my personal circles, there's two paths as it applies to homeopathy. People who are like dedicated diehards and people who are like, meh, I don't believe it, you know? Doesn't mean you have to throw Western medicine out the window if you don't want to, but there is so much good that can come.
It's interesting. I was going to read a little piece of this by a doctor who wrote this in the 1940s. He was a conventionally trained doctor and he became a homeopath. And it's just a very interesting take on this. It's from The Little Homeopathic Physician by William Gutman, MD. It was printed in 1940. And he says in the introduction, all healing originates in the healing power of nature itself. All discoveries in medical science lead again and again to this ancient truth. Therefore, to bring about a real cure, all treatments must depend upon the support of the healing power of nature.
There you have it.
Succinct.
It's succinct. I think a lot of us know that there's a lot more power in nature and a lot more power within our own bodies if those parts of us are just activated. So let's start with you. I understand it all started with you feeling ill. So take us there.
Well, I grew up in a Sicilian American family. My parents were born here, but their brothers and sisters and my grandparents on both sides immigrated from Sicily back in the 1920s. And so there was a schism between my mother and my father in a way. My father believed in modern medicine and all that it brings. My mother believed in the way her mother was raised, and that was you don't use drugs very often, you avoid them at almost any cost. Fresh air, sunshine, the fewer lotions and potions you put on your body, the better off you are. However, as a baby, I developed eczema, and it was pretty severe, and as I grew, it got worse and worse. And this is not that unusual a story. I mean, it is super common. And I was found to be allergic to very common foods and substances around me. Feathers, wool, I live in New York State, so we were always wearing wool, of course, and we had down this and down that and feather pillows. And I was allergic to dairy, and it just went on and on and on. And so my mother did the best she could, but to be honest, she did not hold me back from eating these foods or being around these substances very much. She was hoping I would just grow out of it. But instead of growing out of it, it changed. And I was blanketed in eczema at certain times in my life. It switched from there to gut issues. And when I was a teenager, I had lots of gut problems. My parents were always rushing me to the emergency room, certain that it was something more serious. It never was. It was really just probably, bloating and gas and that kind of thing, which can be painful, but it throws people off and it leads them to believe that something more serious is happening. And then in my early 20s, I married a neurosurgeon. I mean, he was an emergency room physician. And then shortly after, he finished his residency in neurosurgery. And my life changed in many, many ways. We lived in Georgetown. He went to Georgetown University. And so we lived near there. And our life was surrounded by the medical, I would say, elites of this country. And also Northwestern University in Chicago, again, medical elites. And so I just simply listened to what I was told. And so my allergies, food intolerances, gut problems, etc., were met with drugs upon more drugs. Now, there were not very many prescription drugs, but they did show up every once in a while. And when a doctor is in practice, he is given samples of drugs all the time. So we had a linen closet in our house when we lived in Washington, D.C. From top to bottom, from floor to ceiling, from side to side, there wasn't even room for a towel or a sheet or a pillowcase. It was filled from the bottom to the top with drugs. Samples mostly, but drugs. And so anytime he or I or anyone we knew had a problem, we went to the linen closet. And it was a deep one. This was a house built in the 20s. Those closets were huge, and that's all it was. And so I just took whatever. Shortly after that, I had my wisdom teeth extracted, which was a very foolish decision. There was nothing wrong with them. It was just expected that when you're in your late 20s, that you just get rid of superfluous organs and tissue in the body. So I acquiesced and I did it, and I got infections from it. I did not realize that years later, I still had some of these infections that lasted decades. I realized at one point in my early 30s that I was not well with all these meds, over the counters mostly, but certainly prescriptions as well, and including birth control pills. And so I decided that if I'm not well with all the drugs and my husband's colleagues and our friends couldn't help me, then I'm going to just stop the drugs. I'm just stop everything. I'm just going to clean, pure, done, finished. Nothing was going to go into my mouth but food. Now, I am not suggesting that people do that because everyone is different and it really does make a difference. But I felt as though I was at least well enough. I had enough robustness to be able to push through something that might be problematic if I didn't take this or that med. And I was able to do it. And it made a significant, not gargantuan, but enough of a shift that I started to really pay attention. Oh my gosh, I think what I was living was side effects. Side effects from the sinus drugs, from the headache drugs, side effects from the acid problems in my stomach. Now, I didn't really have anything to go by other than my own experience, which was pretty powerful. So I stuck with it. And so I was looking for something to replace it. And the first place I went to was a health food store. And in health food stores, especially back then, we're talking about the 80s, they were encouraging soy products and lots of supplements and vitamins. And subsequently, many years later, I've learned that most of those are synthetic. A supplement can mean cod liver oil, but it can also mean synthetic vitamin D, for example.
By way of context, it might be interesting to know that since Joette first turned to supplements, that trend has only grown wider. According to recent studies, 74% of adults in the U.S. use supplements, and half of them identify as regular users. And Joette is right. Most studies report that up to 95% of the commonly used supplements in the U.S. marketplace are synthetic.
So I started on that journey, and I started to follow taking supplements and vitamins and reading, and that wasn't quite doing it either. I was taking handful. I used to carry Ziploc baggies full of supplements and vitamins, and I would muscle them down before my meal and then during the meal, because some were taken before the meal, some were taken during the meal, some were taken after some were taken before bed. So And I was spending hundreds, at that time, hundreds of dollars per month on these medicaments. So I stopped that too. So I needed to go to the next step. And my next step was now I remarried. My husband, my new husband and I moved to the country outside of Buffalo, New York, and we had 15 acres. And I started to wildcraft herbs. It felt like a cadence. I was able to make my own plant, my own medicines of sorts, not all of them, but a number of them. St. John's wort, horsetail, there were a number of them. And it was really a joy. And that's what brought me into homeopathy. And probably the way I was eating too. Now, I was never a fast food eater. I always loved making food from scratch. But nonetheless, it still wasn't quite right.
It was around this time that Joette was introduced to her first homeopathic remedy.
It was called Nux vomica. It was a 200C that's the potency. At the time, I was fatigued and had asthma and my sinuses. I was still not right. And within about 2 or 3 days, about 50% of my suffering just melted away. And it was only 2 doses, as I recall. Are you kidding me? This was amazing. And so I said, I have to learn about this. So I went to a lecture shortly after that was given by a medical doctor who was retired, but he had become a homeopathic physician after being trained and being in practice for many years. He switched gears and studied and then practiced homeopathy exclusively. And I went to his lecture, and that's what really turned my head around. I bought a simple book. I bought some homeopathic medicines in a kit. That time there were just 29 little remedies in a kit. And I brought them home and I said, I am beyond curious about this. I'm driven. I have to find out more. Now, at the time, well, I was feeling much better. My parents, I'm very close. I was very close to my parents. My father was having cardiac conditions. He had already had cardiac arrest, I believe, twice by that time. My husband was in good health, but I knew that if I was going to have children, I really wanted to embrace this fully. And I wanted full control. That's what I felt I had lost. I'd lost control. Was taking medicament substances that the side effects were listed. But do you think I ever opened up that little pamphlet and read all those side effects? There would be no way, because I believed, I trusted, I thought that it was all that I was protected by, I don't know, the government. I don't know, by the industry. I don't know. I just felt protected.
But people don't realize, not to interrupt, but the supplement industry isn't regulated by the government. So people don't realize that when they go in to buy a quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, a medicine, a supplement, in that whole supplement aisle in your drugstore, there is no FDA regulation on those bottles.
Well, that's true, but what's probably even worse than that is that the medications that are actually made by the pharmaceutical industry are regulated by the FDA and have terrible side effects. And then they're often yanked from the market a few years later after enough people have been damaged.
Can you explain to me what the Nux vomica, what is that? So,
Yeah,
tell me about that.
Homeopathy is made from plants and animal substances often, and it's diluted so that any toxicity that may be naturally found in the original substance is diluted so far that it can no longer be of a problem, and instead it brings forth the curative action. So Nux vomica is a type of, it's sometimes called poison nut. It's diluted 200 times because, as I said, I used Nux vomica 200C. And so it was diluted 200 times. C stands for to the 100th power. Highly, highly diluted. So what it means, in essence, is that everything on this earth, toxic or otherwise, can be made into a homeopathic medicine if diluted properly and potentized, made specifically by a homeopathic pharmacy. The symptoms that Nux vomica would cause if someone were to eat it are now relieved by diluting it and potentizing it, and then administering it to the person who's suffering from those symptoms. So it's like cures.
So interesting. So does it compel your body to jump into action and do something, or is it the
Yes.
actual medication that does it?
I think that what it does is that it simply stimulates the body's natural ability to bring itself back to homeostasis. If I had simply stopped all the drugs, and I had not had so many of them, over time, my body would have found homeostasis, most likely. And that would have given me the life that I was looking for, which was more energy, back to my original energy, my clarity, and that dropped a lot of the allergies, etc. But we get stuck. And also, we've been so medicated and so tinkered with that there's more to be done for most of us than
That
just
makes
wait it
sense.
out and eating good quality foods.
So now you've gone to the one homeopath, you've gone to the lecture, and you're starting to study. I understood that your studies took you to Calcutta.
I was in practice for many years. I was teaching homeopathy. I was teaching it on college level. I taught the first homeopathic course in New York State that was credited by the state at a college level. I had been practicing, teaching homeopathy for almost 2 decades by the time I found these doctors in Calcutta. When you enter Calcutta, the first thing you notice is the poverty and the suffering. Old women would come up to us in a sari, pointing to their open mouths, begging for food. Children were being held by other children. In other words, a 2-year-old was held by, say, what looked like her older sister, pointing to the child's mouth. Hunger. The infrastructure and the outside, the city of Calcutta is in tremendous need of repair. Now, I spent a lot of time in a lot of the doctors' homes and in the facility that I worked in for those years, and they were immaculate and clean and organized and lovely. But the city, the streets, they were really not sidewalks. You could barely walk. There was a human feces on the streets. There were mothers with their children living on the streets, and their only protection was a piece of plastic that they had rummaged from a garbage pile and kind of tied it around a tree and then affixed a stick to it so that they had a little protection during the monsoon season. It was extreme. I've never seen anything like that. And I've been to the Caribbean and seen a couple of Caribbean islands, but this was in such large scale that it was overwhelming. The smells, everything were so different. So I was invited to work at the Prasanta Banerjee Homeopathic Research Foundation in Calcutta. And so I sat next to these great doctors whose parents and grandparents, etc., had also been homeopaths. Now they use homeopathy exclusively, even though they're medical doctors. And that's not uncommon in India to find that. They go to medical school, they might even go to England to go to medical school, or they go to medical school in India, and then they concentrate using homeopathy exclusively. And so I sat by these doctors, especially Dr. Pradeep Banerjee. He has subsequently passed away, as his father, Dr. Prasanta Banerjee, both of whom I sat side by side. I did it the first time I was there for 13 weeks, and it was an experience of a lifetime. I observed and recorded every single case that came in. But what was particularly interesting is that each doctor, and there were 12 total, so that was the doctor I was working with, plus in the other chambers there were 11 other doctors. Each one of them was seeing 100 patients per day. And that is, it's hard to fathom, but people were lined up outside of the clinic, and they would come sometimes 2 days in advance or a day in advance, and they would just camp out on the streets of Calcutta, waiting for their turn to see one of these doctors who was using homeopathy exclusively.
It's fascinating to note that in India, homeopathy holds an important place in the country's healthcare landscape. Homeopathy is officially recognized and promoted by the government through the Ministry of Ayush, Iyush. That's Ayurveda, Yoga and Naturopathy, Unani, Siddha, and Homeopathy. Also, the government supports homeopathy through numerous hospitals, dispensaries, and education programs, and the country has some of the highest numbers of homeopathic practitioners and colleges worldwide.
After I'd been there, and I was there, I think it was 6 times, 6 years, 7 times. I was there 13 weeks the first time, and then 11 weeks the next time, and I was there every day, all day, 12 hours, sometimes even longer than 12 hours per day. And what I did was I observed and recorded close to 7,500 cases of people suffering, and the medicines that were prescribed by these doctors. So when I would go home after, say, the first time I was there, that first 13 weeks, on the next week I'd go back home and I would collate and organize and put it together. And I couldn't move fast enough. All I wanted to do was to get this out to others. Now, homeopathy is a very fascinating medicine, but the way these doctors were using it tripled that, because they were using it according to conditions, not according to the specific person. It's a different philosophy of sorts. So they didn't have time to get to know the person very deeply. When you're seeing 100 patients per day, you better move quickly and chop, chop, get it done. It's got to be done quickly. Because if they each didn't get, there was 1,200 cases per day that were being observed and recorded and treated, then the next day they'd start all over again. So they needed to get through as many as possible. And by doing so, after decades of doing this, and even 120 some years this has been done by this group, by this family, they came up with simple protocols. Not very much unlike, in many ways, conventional medicine. You've got a migraine, you're given this drug. In homeopathy, you've got a migraine, you give picric acid 200 with belladonna 3, and it's used twice daily. That's the way it's done in this clinic. And so I knew that these protocols were possible, because there were also French protocols that I had been using in my own practice, but I had never seen anything to this degree and with such efficacy. So when I came back the next year and spent 11 weeks with them, I often went back to the old cases that I had observed the first year to see what happened. What happened over a year? And indeed, just as I would have imagined, these cases were either much moved along, not perfect necessarily, but much moved along, and in some cases completely cured. In other cases, the person was no longer in need of care. My head was turned. I wanted to learn this. I want to know this for my own personal health, but also for my father, because he had suffered. And so I wanted this for my family. I wanted my father to be able to get off of all of the drugs that he was on, or at least minimize them, so that he was not getting all the side effects, because he was living a side-affected life. That was my motivation. And when you have a motivation based on focusing on someone who really matters in your life in a big way, you almost don't sleep at night. You have to know more.
Absolutely fascinating. So you have been so driven to create what it is that you have now created, and now I understand why. What you have created, Joette, is so remarkable. And when I look at the community that you've built, they adore you, and they are so curious about homeopathy, because I don't think there's that many places or reputable places for the everyday person to go learn about it and to understand how to maybe treat her own home in a more grounded to nature type of way. So tell me a little bit about what it is that you do today and the people that you serve.
First, let me say this, Jamie. Homeopathy, according to the World Health Organization, declares that it is the second most used medicine on earth. And most people, especially those of us in the US and Canada, North America, and Europe, believe, well, that must mean that conventional drugs, conventional medicine must be number one. But that's not so. Number one is Chinese medicine. Number two is homeopathy.
No.
Number three is conventional drug-driven medicine. Isn't that wild? I was floored when I first heard it too, because we live in this bubble. We think that because ask your doctor, buy this, use that, don't only use this drug, don't take anything else, just trust me. That whole paradigm is so ubiquitous in our world. It's in every women's magazine. It's on every television commercial. It's on the internet. It's no matter where you look. But that's not so in the rest of the world. They do have conventional medicine with synthetic drugs, etc. It's only here and New Zealand that pharmaceutical industry is able to advertise on television. 2 countries out of the whole world. Wow. I know. So we think that that's just the way it is. So you're right. When people are looking for a natural way, they don't know where to go because they're asking their doctors, and their doctors don't know a natural way. Now, having said that, I have to say, I have a lot of doctors who have joined our academy in many of our study groups. It's happening much faster now in the last 3 or 4 years than it ever has. A lot of
Yeah.
pharmacists, a lot of doctors, naturopaths, functional MDs, physical therapists, nurses, physician's assistants, but mostly what I teach are moms and grandmothers. We have men too. We have firefighters, we have engineers. My philosophy is that a lot of the healing needs to be done in the home. If we outsource our wellness to someone else, then we have to expect that someone else's ideas will prevail. If we don't agree with those ideas, or we don't like where they're coming from, we're not happy with that, then we have no choice. But we always have a choice if we decide we're going to try to do this ourselves. And so I have study groups. That's called Gateway to Homeopathy. I started a study group myself when I was first learning this back in the 80s with a few friends, and I found it to be so efficacious. We would meet every Thursday night. We did it for 4 years. I wouldn't have missed a single night of it. It was our nourishment. At the time, we were all first having our first babies, and we kind of needed each other. And that's how I have fashioned these study groups that I run now, Gateway to Homeopathy. Mostly mothers and grandmothers, but also we have men. We also have one men's group, and they all study together. It's run by a fellow who's been following me for years, and he's a retired pharmacist. So it appeals to a lot of different kinds of people, but those of us who need to know what to do instead of freaking and thinking, oh my gosh, my child's got a fever, or oh my goodness, my daughter, is having her menses and she's in pain. Now we must take her to an OBGYN. There is a lot that can be done with a little bit of knowledge in the home when the mother, grandmother, family members put their thinking towards learning some homeopathy.
So let's go there. So let's start talking about that, because we're soon to celebrate the first year of the podcast. And in that time, Joette, I have just had such an incredible roster of guests struggling with so many different things. And their one unifying factor is that at some point the switch flipped and they found gratitude, which is a very helpful practice, to mindset optimization and to helping them move forward in a way that begat their success. However, previous to that, they were all struggling with something. And when I think back on some of those somethings, what I realize is that there is often homeopathic remedies or elements that could support them in feeling better, in overcoming, right? If we could just have something to support us in getting past life's hard moments, wouldn't that be preferable to either turning maybe to a medicine with side effects, or for some of these people, they turn to addiction? Can we talk about grief? Because I interviewed Amanda Klutz. She lost her husband, who was a famous Broadway actor. He was one of the first people to contract COVID early on in a public way.
Spiked a fever in the middle of the night, and his heart stopped. They had to resuscitate him, and that he died on the table for 2 minutes, and that his life is minute to minute, and they want to put him on an ECMO machine, which is a machine that runs his heart and lungs, and that's the only thing that will save his life. And do I have my consent to do this thing very quickly, or else he will die, and we'll call you once he's on the ECMO machine to see if he's still alive. That's when I really lost it, probably for the first time. I could not breathe.
And Amanda just fought for him, and unfortunately he did lose his battle with COVID. And then one other past guest that I would put in this category that I think about all the time is Jessica Jansen. She lost a child.
And I got to the hospital, and the nurse kind of looks at me like, okay, you looked at the baby, there's really nothing wrong. But she took out her stethoscope and put down it on his chest and counting the rests, she's doing this. And she's like, oh, we'll just bring you right back. And I'm not even cluing in about how quick this is moving. Next room, curtained off, you're now triaged, you're in. Next nurse comes in, exact same thing. Stethoscope, looks off. And she goes to me, we're just gonna bring you, Mom, come this way. We're just gonna bring you to a private room. And I'm like, we don't even have private healthcare in Canada, but it must be because I washed my hair today. And as we're wheeling back, I just see the words resuscitation room.
I actually interviewed both of those women on the same day. And I said to my mother, who was also a TV journalist and did interviews for 30 years, I said, Mom, how am I going to do this? How am I going to sit and interview these two women? and not lose it. And she gave me some good advice. I actually sat upstairs in my hotel room and I went through my questions and I let myself ugly cry in the hotel room. So by the time I got downstairs for their interviews, I could hold space because I cannot imagine what either of them went through. And Jessica, in particular, just being a mother and listening to her story, which is to lose a child in their first year of life. It seems to me insurmountable. And I think people who haven't been through it think, well, I just couldn't go on. And when you interview these people, their reality is, do I have a choice? I mean, you have to go on, but they're struggling with seemingly insurmountable grief. Explain to us, Joette, how homeopathy might be able to help.
What we do is we look at how is this person suffering from this grief. People experience grief in different ways. One person may grieve by crying incessantly, crying to the point where there's nothing left. And then sometimes at the last minute or even just an hour later, they're laughing almost hysterically. It's as though the central nervous system has gone kaflooey. And the person needs to find that grounding again. And that kind of grief where the pain is beyond comprehension, they talk about it and cry about it and then laugh and then talk and cry and laugh so that the body is the emotions are in overgear. When it's that intense, often the medicine is coffea cruda, 200C. Now, why would I choose that? Well, coffea cruda is very specific for grief, but especially when the central nervous system has gone rapid speed and it's one extreme, another extreme, another extreme, another extreme, and they can't sleep and they go to sleep and then they wake up and there it is again. And then it's only because of pure exhaustion that they can fall back to sleep and then they wake up again and they feel as though their central nervous system is going to crash. Not unlike when someone drinks too much coffee. Now, we're not going to have grief from drinking coffee, but that hyperactivity, that central nervous system that feels like it could crack and shatter at any moment, that is a description for the need of the medicine, the homeopathic medicine, coffea cruda 200C. Because we don't really know exactly what her symptoms were on a day-to-day basis or into the night. But let's say instead it's simply weeping, quietly weeping, and she feels a profound sadness. Of course, we might also think of a remedy that most people who know anything about homeopathy would understand, and that medicine is called Ignatia Amara. Ignatia Amara 200C. And that is when the grief is grand, but it's not making their central nervous system feel as though it's going to crack and shatter. It's just a very deep, horrible sadness. So we have two choices there. We actually have more than that, but without all the specifics, I would say those are the two top medicines that could be considered. And the way they're used is twice daily. A dose of coffea cruda 200C twice daily, 12 hours apart, morning, night, morning, night. And when there is improvement, considerable improvement, you're not going to wipe away grief, the loss of a child. That will never happen. But you want to bring the person to the point where they can at least get up in the morning and take a shower. That they can at least get in the morning and make a cup of coffee and spend time with their spouse and see other people and not be a pile of nerves and a mess. They're still going to suffer, but it might come in waves and it will not be so overwhelming that they're at a breaking point. And so it moves it along a little faster because eventually, even though a woman may lose her child, that never goes away. She could be 85 years old. She's still going to suffer from that to a certain degree, but not on the same level as she would be when it's fresh, a year later, 2 years later, even 3 or 4 years later. So what we want to do is kind of move it along a little faster with this beautiful medicine called Ignatia Amara or coffea cruda.
Sometimes we just feel like there's nothing we can do.
Still, as humans, we must still work through it. We must still find where we need to go in order to finish this work. It is work that still has to be done, but there's no reason for it to be so extreme. There's no reason for someone to say, well, I really shouldn't be taking this, but I'll take it anyway because it does make me feel more comfortable. No, you don't have to worry about that.
Beautiful. So I have several guests that struggled with what I would call mental fatigue. So one of my guests is Jesse Israel, famously started something called the Big Quiet, which is a global meditation movement. He's spoken on stages with Oprah. He worked in the music industry, but found himself riddled with, anxiety and sadness and mental fatigue and overwhelm. And so he would get together a group of music professionals. So during the music festival, and they would go under like a tree and have a meditation circle. And the thought came to him one day, what if the meditation circle was the festival? One of the craziest things Jesse told me in our interview was that even after becoming the face of meditation for a new generation, his mental fatigue and overwhelm did not magically disappear, and he still had to work on managing it.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't?
I really struggled throughout the whole journey of the Big Quiet. And it was this, I wouldn't say I struggled. I'd say I experienced a lot of challenge because it was this back and forth of experiencing anxiety, experiencing, that discomfort of facing this thing that felt so scary to me, and then owning my power, and then embracing that this is what I meant to be doing, and remembering that it's serving something that's so important to people.
Another person who dealt with a lot of mental fatigue and still does is former guest Allie Webb. Allie Webb famously is the founder of Dry Bar. And another person who everybody thinks that just because Allie Webb sold her business for, I think it was like $200 million, but everyone's like, oh, she's just got it made. That's it. Life is easy breezy. And in fact, Allie has struggled through 2 divorces. Her teenage son has been in and out of treatment centers. Happy to say that he's doing quite well. But Allie, like any other mother, wife, businesswoman, human, struggles with mental fatigue.
My brother and I were doing the podcast, and I was like at this point like flaking a lot, and I had so much anxiety, which I'd never had anxiety in my life. And Cam was in his own pain, and Grant was like out of control. I did not know what to do. And Michael and I were interviewing this girl. So before we started recording, I was like, listen, I'm not at my best. My son's going through this stuff. And I was like crying, and I was really struggling.
There's an old song, Joette, mo money, mo problems, right? The mental fatigue can be worse the more success that we get. So let's talk about mental fatigue.
Okay. There are 2 medicines that come to mind when I think of mental fatigue. One is Cali-Phos, or Calcium phosphoricum. And more often than not, it's used in a 6X or a 6C. Now, if it's strictly mental fatigue, such as here I am at 3 a.m, I'm still trying to figure out this schedule with the IRS, and I still don't know how I'm going to run this business in the morning, constantly trying to figure out how to solve this problem or that problem, and the person never gets a break. It can be also used for a lesser situation, such as a student in college where they're studying. They can actually use Cali-phosphoricum 6 to help them break through that fatigue that sets in when we're under too much mental stress. That also is used twice daily. Most of these are. But then there's another one called phosphoric acid, or phosphoricum acidum, also 200C. And this one is very specific, especially if someone has been taking conventional drugs. Doesn't matter what kind, whether they're psychotropic, beta blockers, it doesn't matter. If they have been or are taking them, this phosphoric acid can be very useful when the person feels just washed out. They just don't have that pep any longer. They used to have it, but it's not just from the drugs, but it's also, I wouldn't say it's from the drugs so much as that is a factor that plays into it, but also that heaviness of not being able to move forward. It's a sluggish feeling. It's a feeling that there is, again, too much on my plate. Some people call it adrenal fatigue. It's the same idea. And that is phosphoric acid, 200C, used in that twice daily routine. Those medicines, they can even be used simultaneously. Not at the same time in the mouth simultaneously, but within a few minutes of each other. And that's where these medicines will gently stimulate the body's natural ability to bring it back to homeostasis.
Beautiful. I think I need that medicine, but yes, it seems like it's a parallel path of symptoms, but it's a bit different. I want to talk a little bit about calming a racing mind or managing racing thoughts. So I have Kim Glass, who was an Olympic silver medalist in volleyball, an incredible woman, a fitness model, had everything going for her. And then she walked out of a lunch in Los Angeles and she was attacked by an unhoused person with a metal bolt.
And all of a sudden I see like this man just kind of like, I didn't see, like it was just like I used the word scurry because that's what it was. It was like a movement from a zombie movie or like The Purge. And it was just so quick up to the other side of the car and he was in the middle of the street. And so I saw that he had something like shiny in his hand. And so I'm like, and this is like, when I say instincts matter and you're listening to voices, stop questioning your own voices, whoever it is, like don't question your voice. Something kept saying to me, duck down and look in the window, duck down, look in the window, duck down, look in the window. And I was like, you know, I was having a low week. I was having a really low day and I only ducked down just a little bit. I'm not thinking this guy is about to boomerang this metal piece at my head. And I just feel like, I don't know what happened. You know, I don't know what happened.
And since then, I'll use the word PTSD. I'm not going to diagnose her, but she has a lot of racing thoughts and it tends to, and I think any of us who have been through, it could be a traumatic experience physically or a past trauma in our lives emotionally, or just we have so much on our plate. And that brings me to my other guest I was thinking about, which is Gabby Bernstein. Now, everybody knows Gabby today as, you know, Oprah called her the spiritual guru for a new generation of thinkers or something along those lines. You know, she wrote a book called The Universe Has Your Back. So you might think that it's always just been easy for her, but when she told me her story, she said she just dealt with so many racing thoughts, so much imposter syndrome. You have to be good enough. You have to be this. You know, she was a PR person in New York City, which so was I in the 90s and 2000s.
And for me, when I hit that final bottom, it was when I started to look at my life and realize I was no longer nice. Because I always prided myself in being a nice person. And here I was, like, barking at people at the, you know, somebody waiting my table, or like yelling at my brother, or I couldn't remember where I parked my car. Couldn't remember the name of my intern that had been working for me for like 2 years.
And it led her to fall into a life of addiction, which is eventually her recovery was what led her to seek spirituality. But when I think about those people and I think about just managing the racing thoughts of almost anybody, is there a homeopathic remedy that could help us with that?
Yes, there is. Now, let me step back, because that first story about having been attacked, once someone is attacked, where there 1 minute everything is fine and the next minute, bam, something really extreme happens. They're in an elevator and there's an earthquake. Oh my gosh, they're stuck in the elevator, something very extreme. They're in their car driving along and a Mack truck comes and hits it along the side. From when we go from a life that seems somewhat moving along naturally to an extreme shock like that, and from that time forward, the thinking is post-traumatic stress. Before that person harmed me and my life after. When we see something with two distinct chapters, and the second chapter is all about the shock of fear and angst and worry, I think of the medicine Aconitum Napellus, or aconite. Some people just call it plain old aconite, but it's Aconitum Napellus. Again, 200C. Aconite can release a shock or a fright that has been held in the body or mind for a lifetime. So it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It's not going to cover it up. It's going to allow her to move on as though 30 years ago it happened. So it's more in the distance rather than still holding deeply onto this horrible experience. If her thoughts are racing ever since that second chapter, Aconitum Napellus is an excellent medicine to start with. And now, again, these are not medicines we take for the rest of our lives. We take it for a short period of time until we see a shift. When we see the shift, then we move on. If there's no change, it also means that we move on. Not unlike any medication, we're going to move on if there's no shift. Now, the second story that you relayed is a little different. There's no determining moment in time when everything shifted for her. And then I revert back to the medicine I talked about earlier, which is coffea cruda. If you drink too much coffee, then you get these symptoms of, oh my gosh, I gotta do this, and I gotta do that, and I gotta go here, and I gotta go there, and oh my gosh, I'll never be able to get to sleep, and now I gotta eat this, and I can't eat that, I gotta do this, and that. And the mind is so busy, there's so much going on in that brain, that it is like having had too much coffee. Hence the medicine, coffea cruda, because like cures like. And in her case, I would say it would be coffea cruda 200C.
Fascinating. So I have another that I thought I would bring up, and I had a guest. Her name is Jen Gottlieb, and she's an incredible public speaker. And it's funny that you would never know that she had stage fright at one point. Now, she was also an actress, so she was used to being on stage. But when she had to go on stage as herself, she got stage fright.
I love to be on stage. I love connection. I love what happens when you go and you make that relationship. That's what I live for. But the art of, or the act of going and getting myself there is very hard for me. Sure.
In another really fascinating episode, we had entrepreneurial powerhouse Natalie Dawson. And who would believe that this smart, dynamic woman who is partnered with Grant Cardone and runs a $100 million business portfolio ever suffered with this type of nervousness? But alas,
I had paralyzing fear around public speaking and communication because I had a really bad experience with giving one public speech that was so awful. It was supposed to be 45 minutes and I gave it in a matter of 4.5 minutes and then proceeded to stand at the front of the room while somebody from the back of the room gave the rest of my presentation for me. It was just mortifying.
So one of our best medicines for ailments from worrying about the performance in the future. It could be a child who has to go on stage for a play the next day. It could be a student studying for the LSATs and worried that they're not going to be able to pass it. It's Tuesday and the LSATs are not till Saturday, and they're already worried about it. It could be a performance, and I have a lot of musicians in my family, and I've treated them with this medicine. It's called gelsemium, GELSEMIUM. Now, if it's a situation in which it's only occasional, and those events when she must be herself on stage, then it would be used only then. Once she starts feeling it, if the performance is Saturday night and she starts feeling it Tuesday before, that's when she starts taking gelsemium. If, however, it doesn't show up until Saturday morning, that's when she starts taking it. So it's when we're experiencing the symptoms, that's when we use this medicine, gelsemium.
what an incredible, this really goes to show that there's so many different ways that you can be supporting your own nervous system, your own mental well-being. I want to talk a little bit about boron specifically, because of course, boron is our partner for this set of episodes. And I personally love using boron products. I was introduced to boron through Arnicare because as an athlete and a fitness fanatic and a mom, my whole family gets bumps and bruises. I was just a fan of the product. And that was kind of my portal in to learning about their host of other homeopathic remedies. I know that you really love boron and that, believe that they are the best provider of so many of these. And then they also have their proprietary blends. Tell me a little bit about your experience with that brand and why you think that they're the best.
Well, first of all, they carry most all of the homeopathic medicines that most people would need on a day-to-day basis. And you can go directly to their site. In fact, you can even go to their site, and when you order your remedies at the very end, when you're ready to check out, there's a little box. You can put my name in there and you get a substantial discount. Just put Joette in there and you'll get a discount. But they carry the most important medicines. So that's very important. The other is that they've been around a very long time, and I've been to their facilities, both in Pennsylvania and in not too far from Lyon, France. And so I've seen their manufacturing practices. I know the pharmacists. I know the manufacturing pharmacists. I've gotten to know this company inside and out, and I'm impressed. And who you buy your homeopathic medicines from matters. Because homeopathy is so fast growing, especially in the US, you'll find all kinds of pharmacies, maybe not regulated properly, on Amazon, for example, and other sites. So if I'm going to put something in my mouth that's going to help me, I want it to be the finest. And that's why I trust this particular company to this degree.
That was amazing. So with that, I will say, Joette, thank you so much for being with us here today. Are there any parting words that you have on the concept of gratitude?
Well, everything we gain, I always think, in life comes at a cost. We're not going to get out of this scot-free. We have to suffer. Without suffering, we don't grow. And growth is what it's all about, and wanting to learn more. But that's what makes us, can make us victorious. And let me also say that is my point of gratitude. But I also have to say, and this is my personal way of looking at this, not everyone may agree with this, but I believe homeopathy is God's medicine. These are not synthetic, they're not compounded, they're not owned. They are simply made from nature and diluted and succussed and made in a specific way so that they become valuable tools on a day-to-day basis for families. And so for that I can look out into a field and say St. John's wort is what I used to harvest, is actually Hypericum perfilatum, comes from those little yellow flowers that I used to make into tinctures, only made homeopathically. That coffee that is grown in South America can be ground and made into a homeopathic medicine because of the process of dilution and succussion, etc. It's called the potentization process. Can be made into a medicine that can relieve someone of grief and anxiety and overthinking, etc. This tells me that there's something important to be said about the nature of what has been supplied to us on this earth. For that reason, I would say that I am grateful.
And I must say, so are we. Grateful for all the helpful information Joette shared with us today. Grateful for her generosity in sharing her time and her story. And absolutely grateful to Boron, who partnered with us in bringing to you this extra special episode. What a learning experience. You can find out more if you check out her website, joettecalabrese.com. She also offers courses at Joette's Learning Center and at the Academy of Practical Homeopathy. And of course, you can always follow her on Instagram at Joette_Calabrese. And that, my amazing listeners, wraps up this 3-part mini-series on healing and well-being, courtesy of our wonderful friends at Boron, who remain committed each and every day to bringing us the purest solutions in homeopathy, which can help us all live better lives, physically and, yes, even emotionally, as we make our way through our own journeys to gratitude. You can learn more about Boron and all of their offerings at boronusa.com. That's all for today. Remember, if you like what you heard, if it impacted you in any way, and if you think it's a message other people in your life might like to hear, I'd be so grateful if you'd give me 5 stars, leave a quick little comment. Those things really help. And share this podcast with your friends, either on social media or just word of mouth. I'm on a mission for us all to help each other focus on expanding our attention towards what's good in the world rather than focusing on what's bad, one person at a time. If we all did that, even to our own little sphere of influence, the world has the potential to be a much more radically awesome place. Stick with me, friends. I've got your back. We're in this together, and it's a great day to see the greatness in the day. See you next time. The Gratitudeology podcast is written, executive produced, and hosted by me, Jamie Hess. Sound design and studio production by Gotham Production Studios. Our theme song is Maze by Hills, sung by Nadia Ali. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Gratitudeology.
Will you walk through the fire? Would you ride through the storm? Will you walk on a wire? Will you save me if I fall? Will you break through the madness? Set us down where we're safe. I'll be right